In the dry, sun-scorched plains of West Texas, a deadly mistake is about to unfold. A ruthless cartel crosses the border, targeting a quiet ranch owned by a young woman living alone. To them, it's just another easy piece of land to seize by force. They're dead wrong. Claire Dawes isn't just a rancher's daughter, and her father, Mason Dawes, isn't just an old Marine. For more than 2 decades, he was the U.S. military's most feared warfighter, a ghost of desert combat known only by his call sign, Dust Devil. This isn't just a fight over land, it's a war they never saw coming. When the cartel came for his daughter, they thought they were intimidating a civilian. Instead, they triggered a calculated, ruthless retaliation from a man who turned guerrilla warfare into an art form. What follows is the story of how one man dismantled a cartel force using nothing but his ranch, a few tools, and experience that never fades. Before we jump back into what really happened on that ranch, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story fires you up, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow's drop makes this look like the calm before the storm. Claire Dawes woke before the sun, as she always did. Light hadn't yet spilled over the distant ridge, but the air was already warming, dry, restless, and wind-stirred. She fed the horses, checked the fences, and called out to the old blue heeler limping across the yard. Boomer never barked, but he didn't need to. The twitch of his ears was warning enough. By the time Claire noticed the tire tracks near the north fence, her gut already knew something was wrong. They were too deep to fresh and heading the wrong direction. No neighbors lived that far out. She crouched, fingers brushing the dry soil, studying the pattern. Wide spacing, heavy axle, military-grade suspension, not ranch trucks, not border patrol. She stood slowly, the wind tugging at her flannel like ghost fingers. She didn't reach for her phone. She didn't need to. 10 years ago, before she took over the ranch, before her mother passed, before her father disappeared into a different kind of exile, he told her one thing: if anything ever feels wrong, don't call the cops. Call me. She hadn't spoken to him in years. She pressed the single number saved under the name Dust. He answered on the first ring. Claire, they're here. I'm on my way. Mason Dawes crossed into Texas like a shadow sliding through steel. The border checkpoint barely registered him, just another old man in an older truck, its engine growling like a caged dog. His license plates didn't exist in any system that mattered. The rifle case in the back seat wasn't locked. He drove. With purpose, silence, and a tightening pressure in his chest he hadn't felt in years. Not fear, not anxiety, focus. He hadn't spoken to Claire since the funeral. Time and grief had carved canyons between them. None of that mattered now. Someone had dared to threaten his blood. By the time he turned onto the gravel road leading to the ranch, the sun was up. Dust curled behind his tires in a long ribbon, marking his approach like smoke before fire. Claire met him at the gate, a rifle slung over her shoulder, defiance in her eyes. She hadn't changed. She still stood like her mother, spine straight, jaw set, unafraid. He stepped out of the truck and nodded once. Still remember how to shoot? He asked. You taught me to well, she said. Good. We'll need every advantage. He scanned the horizon, then the tire tracks she'd marked with orange flags. Cartel scouting team, he said. Advance unit, probably armed. If they're here, the main force isn't far. What do we do? She asked. He turned to her slowly. We prepare the land, and we give them hell. The barn became their command center. Inside, Mason moved with calm efficiency, pulling tarp after tarp from hidden crates stashed in the hayloft years ago. Beneath feed sacks and rusted tools sat a small armory, suppressed rifles, claymore mines, tripwires, night vision goggles, satellite comms, all sealed in military crates marked USMC training equipment. Jesus, Claire murmured. How long has this been here? Since before you were born, Mason said. I bought this land for 2 reasons: to raise you right, and to have a fallback point if things ever went sideways. He handed her a pack containing a modern comms earpiece, a sidearm, and a compact field knife. We'll need you wired in, he said. You remember what I taught you about perimeter sweeps? Every step. Good. Start south. Look for anything out of place. If you see tracks, report. Do not engage. Claire nodded, strapping on the gear without hesitation. As she moved out, Mason spread a map across the workbench. Every acre of the ranch had been surveyed, diagrammed, and annotated years ago. He traced the terrain with his finger, marking likely approach points. They'll come from the ridgeline, he muttered. They always think high ground makes them smarter. He got to work tripwires disguised as broken fence lines. Spike traps lay buried in dry creek beds. Old irrigation pipes had been turned into homemade mortars. Every tool served a double purpose. Every inch of the ranch became a layered defense. The barn was no longer just a structure, it was a forward operating base. By sundown, Claire returned with intel. 3 vehicles were parked just over the ridge, concealed beneath commo netting. Mason nodded. That's the observation post. They'll watch us until they think we're vulnerable. They won't find that moment, will they? She asked. No, he said, loading a magazine with practiced precision. But they're welcome to try. By nightfall, the ranch had transformed. What had once been a peaceful spread of dry fields and rusted fences was now a war zone in disguise. Wind moved through the tall grass like whispers of what was coming. Somewhere beyond the ridge, eyes were watching. Inside the barn, dim red light washed over the table as Mason checked each weapon by hand. Claire returned dust on her boots, sweat streaking her face, and dropped to one knee beside the map. Still 3 trucks. No movement. Mason didn't look up. They're waiting for night. They want to hit fast and loud. Claire frowned. Why not come now? Because they're scared. They don't know what's here, only that it isn't normal. He handed her a thermoscope. Tonight, we changed the rules. They moved like ghosts. The old irrigation lines along the western property had once carried water. Now they carried silence. Mason crept through the low ditch, rifle slung across his back, dragging a duffel filled with C4 and flares. Claire moved ahead, eyes sweeping the darkness, finger resting alongside the trigger. T the western tree line. Mason knelt and whispered, "You see that branch? Look again through thermal." She raised the scope. What looked like part of the tree line glowed warmer. An engine, a truck masked with canvas and brush, 2 men nearby, rifles cradled, smoking. She exhaled. They're sloppy. Mason didn't smile. Sloppy is good. They worked in tandem. Claire covered the perimeter while Mason crawled on his belly, slipping beneath the brush like he was back in Kandahar. He planted a shaped charge beneath the nearest tire, then retreated just as silently. Once they reached the ridge again, he flipped the safety off the remote detonator. We wait. The cartel watchers shifted, talked, laughed softly. They weren't ready for what came next. Mason clicked the detonator. The explosion tore through the silence, flames roaring upward like a signal fire from hell. One truck flipped, collapsing into twisted metal and heat. The 2 cartel men never saw the fragments coming. Claire ducked, instinctively, but Mason stayed still, watching through binoculars. 2 down. Now they'll come. You sure? She asked. They'll want revenge, he said, which means they'll move in daylight. That's their next mistake. At dawn, they were ready. Mason had spent the hours before sunrise placing decoy scarecrows dressed in flannel, rifles wedged into their hands. Some had heat packs taped to their torsos to fool drones. Others were rigged with small charges to simulate gunfire when triggered. Claire stood on the porch, eyes fixed on the ridgeline. She didn't blink. Boomer barked once, then went silent. They're coming. Dust bloomed on the horizon. 3 black SUVs tore across the flatland, their approach loud, fast, arrogant. Mason was already prone beside the barn, sighted through a high-powered scope. They'll go for the house. Makes sense to them. And the traps, they'll find them the hard way. As the SUVs closed in, the first swerved, tires catching a wire Mason had strung through the high grass. The explosion turned the vehicle into scrap metal, fire erupting beneath its chassis. The second SUV veered hard to avoid the wreckage and slammed straight into a spiked trench, flipping end over end. Only the third made it through, tires shredded, engine screaming like a dying animal. It skidded to a halt in the yard. Gunmen spilled out. Claire ducked behind the old well and fired once clean shot. Center mass. Mason dropped 2 more in 3 seconds, his rhythm unbroken. The final attacker sprinted for the porch, stepping directly onto a pressure plate buried beneath the soil. The explosion lifted him off the ground and dropped him back in pieces. Silence followed. Smoke hung in the air. The stench of burned rubber, oil, blood. Claire rose slowly. That was the observation team. No, Mason said, lowering his rifle. That was just the first pawns. She looked at him, face grim. Then what happens now? He stared toward the horizon, already planning the next steps. Now we dig in. The real game starts at night. The sun dipped below the ridge, casting long shadows across the ranch. The air cooled, but the tension thickened with every passing minute. Mason and Claire moved silently through the compound, now transformed into a fortress of traps and hidden defenses. The quiet wasn't peace, it was the calm before the storm. Claire checked her earpiece, voice steady. Nothing yet. No movement. Mason nodded. They're regrouping, waiting for night cover. From the barn loft, Mason's team monitored the perimeter on a bank of screens tied to motion sensors and remote cameras. They weren't just defending land, they were preparing for a fight where every second could mean life or death. Claire, Mason whispered into the comms. You're on sniper overwatch. Eyes on the ridge. Call out anything suspicious. Understood, she replied, settling near the old oak. Rifle steady, breath slow. The darkness played tricks on the eyes, but Claire's training took over. She caught a faint shimmer of heat just beyond the ridgeline, movement too subtle for an untrained eye. Figures shifting, whispered orders. They're setting up camp, she reported, probably waiting for reinforcements. Mason frowned. Let's make sure they don't get comfortable. He slipped into the shadows with his sidearm and a suppressed rifle. The plan was simple and lethal: disrupt their rest, force chaos before the real assault. A flash of light cut the sky as Mason triggered a remote flare hundreds of meters away, bathing the night in red. It was a signal. The dance had begun. Startled voices shouted from the ridge. Flashlights swung wildly, scanning the fields below. Mason fired once, a muted crack like a whisper. One man dropped without a sound. Chaos followed. Gunfire snapped back, tracer rounds slicing through the dark. Claire adjusted her position, selecting targets with surgical precision. Each shot sent a message: the ranch was no easy prey, but the cartel was prepared. Their own snipers opened fire from concealed positions among the rocky outcrops, forcing Mason and Claire to move fast, diving behind trees and low walls. Mason's team deployed smoke grenades, turning the battlefield into a murky haze. This wasn't brute force. It was control, deception, survival. The ranch had become a chessboard, and Mason was the grandmaster. Every move calculated, every piece deadly. Hours later, when the gunfire finally faded, Mason gathered the team around the makeshift command table. We sent a clear message, he said, voice low and firm. They'll be back with reinforcements and heavier firepower. We need to be ready. Claire met his eyes. How long can we hold? As long as it takes. We have the advantage: knowledge of the land and the will to protect what's ours. Outside, the stars glittered cold and distant, indifferent to the fight below. The battle for Ironwood Valley was only beginning. The first rays of dawn crept cautiously over the horizon, washing the ranch in soft gold. Beneath the calm surface, tension simmered like molten lava. Ready to erupt, Claire sat on the porch steps, rifle across her lap, eyes fixed on the ridgeline where the cartel's figures had vanished into the night. She was exhausted, but alert. Every muscle ached from hours of vigilance, but there was no room for weakness. Mason joined her quietly, carrying 2 steaming cups of coffee. He handed her one and sat beside her on the weathered wood. You did good last night, he said softly. Your shots were clean. Claire smiled faintly, tired, proud. Had a good teacher. Mason's gaze drifted east as the sun burned away the morning mist. We bought ourselves some time. Not much. Inside the barn, the team was already moving. Jacques, the communications expert, set up makeshift antennas and signal jammers. Riley, the demolition specialist, checked mines and improvised explosives along likely approach routes. Carter, the medic, prepared the small infirmary. Mason moved among them like a calm storm, evaluating every detail. He knew their chances depended not just on firepower, but discipline and coordination. Listen up, he called, gathering everyone around the map on the workbench. They'll hit hard and soon. The ridge is their main vantage point, but we control the valley floor. Use the terrain. Funnel them through the creek bed traps. Push them into kill zones. Riley smirked, flexing his fingers. I like it when they walk into my toys. Mason allowed a rare, brief chuckle. Keep your toys quiet until they're triggered. Surprise is our ally. Claire stepped forward, the weight of responsibility heavy on her shoulders. What about reinforcements? The cartel's bigger than we thought. Mason's eyes hardened. Reinforcements or not, they're walking into a ghost story. Dust Devil doesn't run. Dust Devil fights. He paused, then added more softly, and he's not alone anymore. The team exchanged looks, respect mixed with resolve. Years of experience had taught them the price of underestimating a desperate enemy. Outside, the wind rose, rattling dry branches and sweeping dust across the open fields. The land itself seemed to brace for the coming storm. Later that afternoon, Claire walked the perimeter one final time, checking each trap. The sun beat down mercilessly, but her thoughts were elsewhere, on the family she protected, on the man who had shaped her into a fighter. She stopped at the old oak where her father had first taught her to shoot, and ran her hand along the bark, a silent promise passing between them. "We're ready, Dad," she whispered. "Come what may." As dusk fell again, the ranch settled into an uneasy silence. The team took their positions, shadows blending into the terrain, waiting for the inevitable clash. Somewhere beyond the perimeter, the cartel was moving, gathering, planning, hungry for revenge. But Mason Dawes and his team were ready. This wasn't just a fight for land. It was a fight for legacy. Night fell like a shroud over Ironwood Valley. Stars blinked faintly overhead, while the ranch remained cloaked in darkness, broken only by the dim red glow of Mason's tactical gear and the soft hum of radios. Claire crouched behind a low ridge, eyes sharp behind night vision goggles. The silence was almost deafening, a stillness that warned of danger just beyond sight. "Movement, 10 o'clock, she whispered into her comms. Jox's voice crackled back, calm and precise. "Copy," confirming 3 figures moving along the ridge. Armed and scanning, Mason was already positioned at the rear of the barn, his silhouette swallowed by shadow. He adjusted his scope, the cold steel steady in his hands. "They're probing our defenses," he murmured, testing the waters. Claire's heart pounded, but her breathing stayed controlled. Years of training held her steady. "They think they're ghosts," Mason said quietly. "But this is our ground. Wait for my signal." The trio advanced with practiced stealth, shadows shifting as they closed in. The cartel scouts were closer now, careless in their confidence. A twig snapped beneath Claire's boot. She froze. The scouts spun, weapons raised. "Contact." Mason hissed. In an instant, the night erupted. Suppressed rifle fire cracked softly but lethally. Mason's team unleashed a precisely timed ambush. One scout dropped silently, a clean shot to the head. The others scrambled for cover behind rocks and sparse brush. Claire rolled behind a boulder, reloading with practiced speed. Her pulse slowed into the focused calm of a predator. Riley triggered a tripwire. A sharp crack split the air as a claymore detonated, sending one scout sprawling. "Fall back." One enemy shouted, but it was too late. Mason advanced, clearing the ridge with methodical, ruthless efficiency. Within minutes, the scouting team was neutralized. Boomer emerged from the darkness, his silent presence a ghostly reminder of the Dawes family's watchful eye. Mason crouched beside Claire and nodded. "They came for us," he said grimly. "And we sent a message." They searched the bodies quickly, finding radios and maps marked with the ranch's layout. "They know the land," Claire said, tension tight in her voice. "They'll come prepared next time," Mason replied. "But so will we." Back at the barn, the team regrouped, patching wounds and updating intel. "This was just a scouting party," Jox said, tapping at his tablet. "The main force will arrive within 48 hours. Mason's jaw tightened. "Then we'll be ready. This ranch isn't just a home. It's a fortress." Outside, the wind shifted, carrying with it the distant rumble of engines and faint voices. The battle for Ironwood Valley had begun. The first light of dawn spread across the valley, revealing a landscape scarred by preparations for war. The ranch was no longer a simple homestead. It had become a fortress, bristling with lethal intent. Mason Dawes stood at the center of the barn, surrounded by his trusted team. Jox, the communications expert with a talent for hacking enemy signals. Riley, the demolition specialist whose hands were as steady setting charges as they were calming shaken. Teammates, and Lena the sniper, whose calm precision had saved lives in more conflicts than any of them cared to count. "All right," Mason began, spreading a detailed map across the rough wooden table. The room was thick with tension and the smell of diesel and dust. "They've already sent a scouting team, and we know the main force is coming. Better armed, more dangerous." Claire listened closely, gripping her rifle, her eyes moving between the map and the faces around her. "They'll come up the ridge," Mason said, pointing to a jagged line on the map. "High ground gives them the advantage they think they need, but they won't know what's waiting for them," Jox added. Mason nodded. "We've got tripwires, mines, and improvised mortars ready to greet them. But this isn't just about traps. It's about controlling every inch of the battlefield." He paced slowly, eyes sharp. "Lena, You're on overwatch. Your shots will slow them down, pick off leaders, disrupt their formations. Lena gave a faint nod, already checking her scope's calibration. Riley, Mason continued, you and I handle the explosives. When they push forward, we collapse the choke points. Their vehicles won't move an inch. Riley smiled grimly. I like the sound of that. Claire's gaze hardened. And me? You're the eyes on the ground, Mason said. Patrol the south perimeter. Watch for flanking maneuvers. Call it in immediately. You're fast, and you know this land better than anyone. Claire swallowed, then nodded. The weight of responsibility settled heavily on her shoulders, but it wasn't unwelcome. Outside, the team spread out, movements practiced and precise. Mason watched as Claire slipped into the shadows, her silhouette dissolving into the scrub. The ranch hummed with whispered commands and the soft clicks of safety switches engaging. Every fence line was reinforced, every post a potential barrier. Boomer padded silently at Mason's side, his old but loyal presence a steady reassurance. The sun climbed higher, baking the earth beneath them. Dust curled in lazy spirals as Mason walked the perimeter one last time, checking each trap and tripwire. This land had been in his family for generations, but today, it belonged to the warriors sworn to defend it. That evening, as the sun dipped low and gold bled into the horizon, the team gathered for a quiet moment. Mason produced a bottle of whiskey, a rare luxury. To the family we choose, he said, raising it. And the fight we're about to win. Claire felt warmth spread through her, not just from the drink, but from the bond forged in these desperate hours. They were more than a team now. They were family under fire. As night deepened, Mason climbed to his sniper perch, eyes scanning the dark ridge beyond the valley. Wind whispered through dry grass, carrying the distant hum of engines. They're coming, Lena murmured over the radio. Mason's fingers tightened on the rifle stock. Let them come. The battle for the Dawes Ranch was no longer just survival. It was a war for legacy, and Mason Dawes was ready to make the land itself rise against anyone who tried to take it. The night air grew heavy with tension, every breath weighted. From his vantage point, Mason spotted faint silhouettes creeping along the ridge. Cartel scouts, probing for intelligence, unaware they'd already been logged. Lena adjusted her scope, breath steady. 2, maybe 3 in the northeast sector. Moving slow and quiet. Good, Mason replied. Let's keep them nervous. Jox, any comes traffic? Jox's fingers danced across his portable hacking rig. They're trying to transmit. I'm jamming them. They won't know what hit them. Below, Claire crouched in the scrub, as sharp, scanning for movement. The rustle of leaves and snapping twigs quickened her pulse, but she held steady, a lesson learned the hard way. A muffled crack split the darkness. A sniper round. One cartel scout collapsed. Silence followed. They think it's a ghost, Mason said quietly, chambering another round. The ambush had begun. The first strike unfolded as controlled chaos. Tripwires erupted in bursts of dirt and flame, hurling jagged shrapnel into the night. Claymores detonated, razor fragments carving lethal paths through advancing scouts. Riley and Mason worked in sync, remotely collapsing narrow routes and disabling vehicles trying to maneuver. Vehicle disabled. East flank, Jox called. The cartel was forced to pull back, scrambling for safer ground. Arrogance shattered. Inside the barn-turned command center, Mason watched live feeds from Lena's scope and Jox's drone. Pressure's on, he muttered. They're not used to being hunted. Claire's voice crackled over the comms. There's movement at the south ridge, Claire reported. Looks like a small squad trying to flank us. Mason's eyes narrowed. Hold your ground, but keep them spotted. Don't get drawn out. Claire pressed herself low behind a boulder, heart pounding as she relayed enemy positions. This isn't just a raid anymore, she thought. It's a war on my home turf. The cartel's mistake was clear. They had underestimated the defenses, the knowledge, and the lethal precision of one man and his team. Back on the ridge, Mason's voice came through calm and cold. They came for my daughter. Tonight, they'll learn why the dust devil never truly disappears. The night stretched into hours of gunfire and explosions, the battle raging like an unstoppable storm. By the time the first rays of dawn touched the horizon, the cartel's scouts were dead, captured, or fleeing in disarray. Mason lowered his rifle and drew in the cool morning air. This is just the beginning, he said. We make them regret every step they take. Claire approached, eyes fierce but proud. We held them off. Yeah, Mason replied with a grim smile. But next time they'll bring more than scouts and we'll be ready. The sun had barely cleared the horizon when a distant rumble rolled across the plains, low and ominous like an approaching storm. Mason's instincts screamed reinforcements. From the barn lookout, Lena spotted the glint of armored vehicles crawling over the ridge. "They're bringing in heavy hitters," she reported, tense but steady. Mason gathered the team around the table. "This is their second wave. Better trained, better armed, and angrier." Jocks tapped furiously at his laptop. "At least 2 armored trucks with mounted machine guns, plus support squads on foot." Claire tightened the straps on her gear, eyes hard. "They think firepower will break us. They haven't met the land or the people who know how to fight on it," Mason said. The ranch transformed again. Fortifications deepened, barriers reinforced, escape routes refined with ruthless precision. Roles were assigned. Without hesitation, Riley took the south perimeter, explosives and tripwires primed. Lena positioned herself in the barn tower, sniper rifle ready. Mason and Claire patrolled the western flank, where the terrain dipped into a narrow canyon, a natural choke point. "This land knows us better than they ever will," Mason told Claire as they moved through the brush. "That knowledge is our deadliest weapon." Under cover of dusk, the cartel advanced. Armored vehicles growled over the rough ground. The first shots came fast, brutal bursts of machine gun fire shredding brush and kicking up dust. Mason's team was ready. Explosives crippled vehicles before troops could deploy. Claymores snapped, turning narrow paths into kill zones. Lena's calm voice cut through the chaos. 2 down near the ridge. Sniper nests compromised. Jocks kept enemy communications jammed, deepening their confusion. On the western flank, Mason and Claire spotted a squad pushing through the canyon. "Move fast," Mason ordered. "Hit hard." Together, they unleashed a deadly mix of gunfire and grenades. The cartel soldiers, caught off guard, fell one by one. Despite superior numbers, the attackers were outmatched by terrain, timing, and precision. By midnight, the assault faltered, the remaining forces retreating into the shadows. Mason wiped dirt from his face, voice low but satisfied. "They're starting to respect the ground they walk on." Claire, bruised but unbroken, nodded. "They'll think twice before coming back." Mason's eyes stayed cold and calculating. "This isn't over. They'll regroup, bring more firepower. We need to be ready." Back in the barn, Mason pulled out a faded photograph, a younger version of himself surrounded by comrades long gone. "This fight," he whispered, "it's for them too." The team understood. This wasn't just about defending a ranch. It was about honor, legacy, and restless ghosts. The night stretched on, heavy with tension and the sharp scent of spent gunpowder. Mason sat alone on the porch, cold desert air biting as he stared into the darkness. The ranch was quiet behind him, but the silence weighed heavier than any firefight. Claire joined him, her voice barely a whisper. "They'll be back, stronger." Mason nodded, eyes fixed on the horizon. "They always come back." Claire hesitated before asking, "Why did you disappear all those years ago? Why leave everything behind?" He looked at her, then the daughter he barely knew anymore, hardened by loss yet still burning with that same stubborn fire. "I had to disappear so I wouldn't drag this life into yours," he said at last. "But I was always watching, always waiting. I knew this day might come." Claire swallowed hard, the weight of his words settling between them. "I'm glad you're here now." Inside the barn, the team gathered for a briefing. Maps covered the table, every inch of terrain analyzed, every possible enemy move anticipated. Lena pointed to a ridge along the eastern edge. "That's where the cartel's command post is likely set up. They're coordinating reinforcements from there," Jocks added. "We've intercepted chatter. They're calling in a final wave at dawn, helicopters, heavy artillery, the works." Mason's jaw tightened. "They want a war. Let's give them one." The plan was meticulous. Lure the cartel deeper into the ranch's defenses, use natural terrain and traps to their advantage, and eliminate the enemy before heavy equipment could be used effectively. Claire checked her gear for the 3rd time that night. "I'm ready." Mason allowed a rare, faint smile. "Good. This land isn't just soil and stone. It's a battleground, and we're the ghosts haunting it." The hours before dawn blurred into preparation. Tripwires reset, sniper positions adjusted, communication lines tested. Mason walked the perimeter alone, a ghost among ghosts, recalling every lesson from years of combat, how land could hide you, protect you, and become your fiercest ally. The first hint of sunrise was a pale promise on the horizon when the rumble began again, louder now, closer. The cartel's final wave was coming. Dawn broke, bleeding fiery orange across the Texas sky. Silence shattered as the ground trembled beneath roaring engines. 4 armored trucks crested the ridge, dark and menacing against the brightening horizon. Mason stood at the ridgeline, binoculars pressed tight. The cartel's final wave had arrived well armed, confident, certain their numbers would overwhelm the defenders. They hadn't accounted for the ghost waiting in the dust. Claire crouched beside him, rifle steady against her shoulder. Her breathing was controlled, every muscle coiled tight. They're moving slow, almost cautious. Mason shook his head. They've been watching too much TV. Real combat's different. With a subtle gesture, Lena radioed the team. Positions confirmed. Wait for my mark. Hidden in the brush below, snipers selected their targets. Mason's team moved like shadows, each member a weapon honed by years of war. The first sign the ranch was no ordinary farm came with a sharp crack of tripwire snapping beneath the lead truck. A shrill whistle followed as improvised mortar rounds launched from concealed pipes, exploding with brutal accuracy across the convoy. Chaos erupted. Soldiers dove for cover, bullets chewing into dry earth. Mason moved fast, leading a flanking group, using every rise and dip in the terrain for cover. Claire fired with precision, each shot calculated, cutting down those trying to escape the kill zone. Behind them, Jocks activated the Comes jammer, severing calls for reinforcements. Trained for brute force, the cartel fighters found themselves disoriented and besieged. Confidence drained as they fell one by one to the ranch's defenses. A truck detonated, a fireball ripping into the sky. The blast shook the ground beneath Mason's boots, but he didn't flinch. Keep pushing, he ordered. Drive them into the creek traps. Claire nodded, hands steady despite the surge of adrenaline. The creek, once a dry channel, had become a death trap. Deep pits masked by fragile brush, spikes hidden beneath the soil. As cartel forces stumbled into the ambush, the traps claimed more lives. Then the sound of rotor blades sliced through the gunfire. The cartel's helicopters arrived, armed with heavy machine guns and rockets. Mason cursed softly. They want to burn this place down. Not if I can help it, Lena replied grimly, lining up her anti-materiel rifle. She squeezed the trigger. The heavy round tore through the first helicopter's tail rotor. The aircraft spiraled wildly, slamming into a distant mesa in a thunderous explosion. The second helicopter banked, searching for targets. Mason barked orders to deploy smoke grenades and shift positions. As the fight intensified, Claire moved through the chaos with lethal grace. Every shot she fired carried a message this land was not theirs to take. She spotted a cartel commander shouting orders, his arrogance now edged with panic. Target him, Mason growled over the radio. Seconds later, Claire's bullet found its mark. The commander fell, and his men wavered. By midday, the cartel's forces were in full retreat, scattered, broken. Mason surveyed the battlefield, sweat streaking through the dirt on his face. This land isn't just dirt and fences anymore, he muttered. It's a tomb for those who forget how to fight. Claire approached, wiping soot from her cheek. What now? Mason's eyes burned with cold fire. We prepare for their next move. They won't quit and neither will we. The sun sank low, casting long shadows over the scarred landscape. The once quiet ranch bore the marks of war, scorched earth, shattered fences, the lingering stench of smoke and gunpowder. Silence settled heavy, but Mason knew it was only a pause before the storm returned. Claire moved through the wreckage, scanning for signs of life, friend or foe. Bodies lay scattered, some familiar faces from Mason's team, others fallen enemies. She knelt beside a soldier and gently closed his eyes. They didn't expect this, she murmured. No, Mason said quietly. They thought this was just a farmer's land, easy pickings. They underestimated everything. Back in the barn, Mason convened the team. Maps covered the tables under the soft glow of battery-powered lamps. Radios crackled with fragmented updates, enough to reveal the cartel's desperation. Lena paced, rubbing the back of her neck. They're pulling back, but regrouping fast. Probably calling reinforcements. Jocks shook his head, eyes narrowed. With the helicopters down, their air support's crippled, but they'll hit harder. We've only slowed them. Mason nodded, fists clenched. Good, that buys us time to strengthen our defenses. He turned to Claire, already studying the maps. What do you see? She traced a finger along a narrow canyon miles away. If they regroup here, it becomes a staging point for a larger strike. We need to hit them before they organize. Mason made his decision. Tonight, a small team goes out. We take the fight to them, Em and Claire said immediately. Lena and Jocks exchanged a glance, then nodded. We'll cover you. The night air was sharp and cold as the four moved out, slipping through rugged terrain like ghosts. Every step silent, every breath measured. Claire's heart pounded not with fear, but purpose. This was no longer just survival. It was about reclaiming what was theirs. They reached the canyon rim as moonlight washed over the valley below. Fires flickered among cartel tents. Men lounged unaware of the storm closing in. Mason surveyed the scene, then motioned. The attack was swift and brutal. Explosions shattered the calm. Gunfire erupted from every direction. Cartel soldiers scrambled, caught off guard by the precision strike. Claire's shots were deadly, cutting down sentries before alarms could sound. Lena planted charges on supply crates, turning resources into fire. Jocks hacked their communications again, feeding false commands that rippled confusion through the ranks. The retreat was chaos, men stumbling over each other, desperate to escape the sudden assault. Under cover of darkness, Mason's team returned to the ranch and moved quickly to reinforce defenses and tend to the wounded. Back in the barn, Mason looked over his team, exhausted, bloodied, but unbroken. This is more than a fight for land, he said quietly. It's a message, Claire nodded, determination burning in her eyes. We're not just defending a ranch. We're defending our lives, our family. As dawn neared, Mason stepped outside, staring toward the horizon where smoke still curled faintly from the distant canyon. He felt the weight of what lay ahead. This wasn't just a battle anymore. It was a war, and one he intended to win. Morning light burned through a haze of dust and smoke, casting harsh illumination over the battered ranch. The air was thick with tension, the calm before the inevitable storm. Mason Dawes and his team worked fast, patching wounds, repairing defenses, preparing for what was coming. Claire stood near the gate, rifle in hand, eyes fixed on the horizon. The echo of gunfire still lingered in her bones, the taste of adrenaline sharp on her tongue. There was no time to rest. A low rumble in the distance caught her attention. At first, she thought it was the wind, but then she saw the dust clouds larger, faster, moving with purpose. They're coming back, she said, her voice steady but sharp. Mason appeared beside her, his expression grim. They've called in heavy support from the ridge above. Cartel reinforcements rolled in trucks bristling with machine guns, men armed to the teeth, and behind them, the unmistakable thump of helicopters cutting through the air. This was no longer a scouting party or a hit-and-run group. This was a full assault. Mason turned to his team. This is what we trained for. Inside the barn, plans were drawn and redrawn. Commands were issued with precision. Every fighter knew their role: sniper nests, demolition points, communication relays. Medical stations. Claire was assigned to the eastern flank, a choke point where the terrain funneled attackers into a narrow pass. Remember, Mason told her, they have numbers. We have the advantage: terrain, traps, and surprise. The first wave hit hard. Gunfire erupted from every direction, bullets pinging off metal and wood. Explosions ripped through the dry earth as mines and improvised charges shredded tires and tore through advancing troops. Claire fired from concealment, picking off cartel soldiers one by one, her breathing steady, her aim deadly. Above, helicopters circled, dropping grenades and laying down suppressive fire. But Mason's team was ready. The barn's reinforced walls absorbed the blasts while hidden countermeasures disrupted some of the aircraft's targeting systems. Amid the chaos, Mason moved like a ghost, coordinating attacks, setting ambushes, keeping morale intact. Jocks, get eyes on the south ridge, he barked. Boomer, take point with the medkit. We've got wounded coming in. The battle dragged on for hours, the sun climbing as the ranch became a war zone. At one point, a cartel commander broke through the defenses, charging toward the barn with a small squad. Claire met them head-on. Her rifle cracked, dropping two before the commander lunged at her with a knife. They grappled, the struggle fierce and desperate. Claire's training took over a quick twist, a sharp strike, and the commander collapsed, lifeless. She barely had time to catch her breath before reinforcements forced her to fall back to a secondary position. Meanwhile, Mason spotted movement near the ridge. Their leader, he muttered, eyes narrowing. This man was no ordinary thug, arrogant, ruthless, clever. In many ways, a reflection of Mason's own past. He wouldn't let this fight end easily. As the battle raged, Mason prepared for the inevitable confrontation. He moved quietly, weapon ready, scanning for the man who had brought this chaos to his land. When they finally met, it was under the harsh glare of the afternoon sun. Two warriors locked in a deadly exchange. Bullets flew, tactics collided, every move countered by another. The fight was brutal and personal. Mason's decades of experience against the cartel leader's raw aggression. But it was Mason's calm, his tactical mind, and the weight of every hard-earned lesson that gave him the edge. In the end, the cartel leader lay defeated, captured. His reign broken. As the sun set behind the mountains, silence returned to Ironwood Valley. The cartel's forces scattered, broken, and leaderless. Mason and Claire stood side by side, battered but unbowed. "We've won this battle," Mason said quietly. "But the war isn't over," Claire nodded, eyes scanning the darkening horizon. "We'll be ready." Night settled over the ranch, cloaking the land in deep stillness. The only light came from the fire pit near the barn, where Mason and Claire sat exhausted, but alert. The distant rumble of retreating engines faded, replaced by crickets and the soft rustle of wind through mesquite trees. Mason lit a cigarette, the ember glowing in the dark. He exhaled slowly, eyes reflecting the fire. "This land," he said quietly, "is more than dirt and fences. It's family, it's memory, it's legacy." Claire nodded, her gaze fixed on the flames. "I never thought I'd see the day when the ghosts from your past came knocking like this," he smiled faintly. "Ghosts don't always stay in the past. Sometimes they have to fight to protect the future." In the days that followed, the Dawes Ranch returned to a semblance of normalcy. Repairs were made, the land tended, and wounds both physical and emotional slowly began to heal. But beneath the surface, something had changed. Claire and Mason were no longer just father and daughter, separated by years of silence and regret. They were a team, bonded by blood and battle. Their relationship had been reforged in the crucible of violence and survival. News of the cartel's defeat spread quietly across West Texas, whispered among law enforcement and rival gangs alike. The message was clear. This was no ordinary ranch. This was the territory of the Dust Devil, a man who had turned warfare itself into a weapon against anyone who threatened his family. And those who dared cross that line would pay the price. One evening, as the sun sank below the horizon, Mason and Claire stood at the edge of the pasture, watching the horses graze in the fading light. "I'm proud of you," Mason said, resting a hand on Claire's shoulder. "You fought like a soldier." Claire looked up at him, her eyes bright with gratitude and resolve. "I learned from the best." He gave a quiet chuckle. "Good, because the world is never going to stop trying to take what's ours." They stood together as darkness settled in, ready for whatever came next. In the quiet moments before dawn, Mason reached for his phone and dialed a number saved under Old Ghost. On the other end, a familiar voice answered calmly. "Mason." "It's done," he said simply. "About time," the voice replied. "We've got your back." The Dust Devil had returned not just as a warrior, but as a guardian. His fight was far from over. For Claire, for the ranch, and for every family standing in the path of ruthless men who believed they could take what didn't belong to them. This is the story of Mason Dawes, the most feared ex-Marine turned rancher, and how one man's legacy became a symbol of resistance against a merciless cartel. If this story grabbed you, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell. Tomorrow, we'll take you inside the shadowy world of cartel intelligence, how the drug lords operate and what it takes to outsmart them.